Tribal Health and Human Services Department of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes is proud to present Good Medicine, a program dedicated to the wellness of the Flathead Nation. The mission is summarized quite simply: a healthier people, a stronger nation. We will strive to make Good Medicine a reliable source of ideas and information about health issues so that everyone can make informed decisions about their own lifestyle and health care. You will meet health professionals, tribal government and spiritual leaders, and interesting people from the tribal community discussing important health issues that profoundly affect us all.
Good morning or good afternoon. This is Roxane Colman-Herak on Good Medicine today. We're going to be talking about some problems and some concerns that I think a lot of communities are sharing. Today, our topic of discussion is going to be on some of the drug issues that we're facing in our community. We have Craige Couture here, Chief of Police for the CSKT Tribal Law and Order Department, who's going to be sharing some insight, some experience, and kind of what his thoughts are on where we are with this problem, where we're going, and if there's any hope at the end of the tunnel. So, Craige, thank you very much for coming today and sharing some insight with us. Let's talk a little bit about the problem with meth and other drugs here.
Okay, if I could backtrack just a little bit. You and I have been working together in one way or another on drugs and whatnot for at least like the past 15 years. Mm-hmm. And we were here during the heyday of the meth lab crisis. And that was during the time with the Montana Meth Project and others. And there was times when we would take out like 5 to 6 meth labs in a day and remove children from homes and arrest 19 to 20 people at a time. And we worked hard and long hours to battle that. And we've seen a big decline from around 2005 till around 2009. And we kind of started seeing it pick back up. And we knew that, that the drug is kind of going to peak and valley. It's going to come in peaks and valleys. And so we knew and we expected things to start picking back up, but really had no idea of the severity and how fast it would pick back up. So when we're looking at meth labs back in the early 2000s to now in 2014, we don't see the meth labs anymore. Legislation was passed because of the help with the Montana Meth Project, and legislation was passed to control the precursors and drugs in the chemicals to make methamphetamine, so it was harder to buy the chemicals. And so what that's done is it has actually increased drug traffic as far as people from out of state coming in here to sell drugs.
That sounds pretty. That sounds pretty telling to what's really going on out here today. You mentioned something that's kind of a point of interest to me. Is back in 2005, how long did that meth project go on? Was that like a 2-year thing? Was it a 3-year thing?
It was a few years, and I believe there's still a portion of it going on. I know that during the time frame there were posters, there were websites, there were television commercials, and they really did a lot of public information, and that was important because I think the communities need to get behind something like this. Because when you're seeing the problem as we're seeing it now, the education of the public and letting the people know that the problem is severe as the law enforcement sees it, they really need to see the damage that the drug does. And I think the general public, most people go home after work, they have dinner, they maybe watch a little television, and they're in bed at a fairly early hour. Mm-hmm. Well, by the time everyone is going to bed, that's when the drugs and the drug trafficking and the drug use really picks up. So most people, most average citizens never see it because they're not out during the times when that happens.
I could ask you a question, and I know this has been probably one you've heard in the past. What are the drugs that seem to be problematic in our community? It used to be, we was concerned about marijuana. It's like, I think it's a little bit beyond marijuana at this point. What is out there?
Well, marijuana is still there. and we see it quite often, but the drugs that really harm people, put people in the hospital and cause death, are going to be prescription drugs. Is probably the one that when we see methamphetamine, we typically find prescription drugs along with it. And those two drugs have been going hand in hand for a lot of years. And the prescription drug problem is, as I was talking to you earlier, I actually looked into how many overdose deaths we have in our area versus fatality crashes on our highways. And I've done this through the Montana Board of Vital Statistics. And they actually have a group of people who just gather statistics, and they have those numbers. And it takes them a little while to gather the information. But I called up and asked, what's the difference between the two? And the guy said, that's a really good question. He said, that's something we've never looked at. So they started looking at it for me. And I was really shocked to see that we have more prescription drug deaths than we do traffic fatalities on our highways. And when you look at that, of all the drugs that we have in the area, the ones that are killing people are the ones prescribed by doctors. And the meth is right along with it. The meth causes people to abandon every sense of decency that they have. You have a person who is a good worker, a good husband, a good father, and they start using meth, and the next thing you know, they're losing their job, they're beating their kids and their wives, and they become violent, and they completely change. It changes the way they look, the way they act, everything about that person will change.
The community, as I understand it, is taking a more proactive approach. I mean, this is not a problem we can sweep under the rug anymore. This is not a problem that is not a problem. This is a serious concern, I think, for all the people in our community. There are some efforts underway right now to try to get more community collaboration, some partnerships, getting all the players sitting at the same table to talk about a common problem. Are you involved with that process?
Yes, I am. Actually, today they're having another meeting, and they're discussing issues that are going on here as we speak. And what that was is the Tribal Council passed a resolution, and that was to form a substance abuse work group. And we haven't really named ourselves yet, but it has different department heads and citizens and whatnot throughout the area that come together to start to figure out solutions to this problem. Because, through the years I've heard it from a lot of people say, well, drugs is a victimless crime. I really wish it was a victimless crime. Because when you look at drugs as a whole, it affects law enforcement first and foremost. We deal with the drug problem, but that's not where it ends. It affects the courts, and then from there it's usually involving housing of some sort. Health is involved, so hospitals and health, ambulance crews. It affects the school systems. It affects early childhood services. It affects truancy of students. So this group is formed with a lot of those people involved in it, as well as former addicts, people who are, or I should say recovering addicts, who know the devastation that the drugs cause. And so with a group like that together, in coming up with solutions to the problem are going to be key. Because if law enforcement had the solution to this problem, we would have already fixed it. And it's going to take a community effort from all people. Because what's going to happen is we're going to still make the arrests on people, and then they're going to go through the court system. But once they're done with the court system, they go right back out and right back into what they were into before. So if we have a group of people and what can be provided for that person as they get out, and the court can hold them to that. So a person could be arrested, incarcerated, come out, and have specific people that they'll have to be in touch with, and maybe have some meetings set up, not like Narcotics Anonymous or something of that nature, just to sit down and talk about the issues, to deal with it along with other addicts and what they're going through. Maybe some mental health aspects of it, maybe some counseling that goes along with it, and have a group of mentors that this person can call if they're having a bad day. I think if we work on it together as a group, we can find solutions to it.
Well, it seems like meth is still a word that's pretty alive out there. Meth is still a concern. I think it's a growing concern in our community. What are some of the other, I know I've heard some discussion on bath salts. I had no idea what bath salts were. I had no idea. I mean, some of the terminology that you hear out here, there are so many of us that don't know what this is, what it would look like, what are some of the symptoms you would look for. How would you recognize it if you were face to face with it?
With meth or with the synthetics, which are both? Would you like to kind of see both? Well, let's start with meth. First of all, if you see someone who's using methamphetamine, you're usually going to see a drastic weight loss. Some people who've been using it long enough won't have their weight loss anymore. But dilated pupils is one thing they're going to see. Like I can look right now and see your pupils in their normal size for the light that we have in here.
Am I good?
You look good. You look
Okay.
fine. So with that, a lot of officers are trained to see that. So the average citizen necessarily is not. And I actually did a training at one of the hospitals once and talked about this issue. It was for the emergency room staff a few years back. And many of them had no idea that that could be one of the signs and symptoms of drug use is the pupils. And elevated pulse, which a normal person isn't going to see. Elevated blood pressure is another thing with methamphetamine. You're going to see dry mouth. You're going to have irritability to light, because when the pupil is extremely dilated, the colored portion of your eye is roughly 10 millimeters. But when a person's on methamphetamine, bath salts and spice potentially, their pupil will be 9 millimeters. So basically the whole colored portion of your eye will be a giant pupil. So imagine being in a room like this or out in the sunlight and how bad that's going to affect your eyes. Anyone who has to go see an eye doctor and they get their pupils dilated, that's exactly what it looks like. And the sensitivity to light after you see the doctor after they dilate your pupils is extreme. So you're going to see people wearing sunglasses in unusual settings is one thing you can see. And just the overall appearance and agitation in their movements are not smooth and fluid movements. They're kind of jerky kind of movements as they move in their mouth. They'll have involuntary twitches and facial twitches in their mouth where it looks like they're trying to bite at the air. It's pretty extreme. You see it, and if you kind of get in tune to seeing or looking for the signs, you'll see it in a lot of places. Track marks is another thing you'll see on people's arms, is the needle marks where they continually inject in the same area where it'll put scarring on the arms. Other things you'll see is burnt fingers, where if they're smoking it through a glass pipe or something, their fingers will be black and burned extremely bad. You can see blistering and around the mouth where they may be burned from smoking it. Tooth decay. Serious tooth decay in a very short period of time. So someone who may have really nice teeth in just a matter of months may be starting to miss and have teeth rot out. So a lot of things you'll see with the decay, especially with methamphetamine. Now when you look at the bath salts, which is a synthetic, and it was marketed and called bath salts, but the intention was to never use it as a bath salt. Whoever marketed it originally marketed it as a drug is what it was for. And they disguised it as bath salts, and that's how it was allowed to be sold. And right on the containers it would say not for human consumption. And that's how they got away with doing this and selling a really addictive and powerful drug with a lot of hallucinogenic type issues to it. There's YouTube videos and other things that anyone who's watching, I'd recommend, if you have access to a computer, to just type in bath salts videos and really look at the bizarre behavior of these people on bath salts. And I mean, it's just completely, you can tell that they're disassociated. Their head and their body are completely disassociated because involuntary laughing and just really extreme things with the bath salts. Now with the spice, a little bit different. It's more, they originally marketed that as like a synthetic choice for like marijuana.
So they're not the same?
Not the same at all. Spice is actually marketed as an incense. So you could use it to actually use it as an incense for a good smelling and place in the house. But what people discovered with that same thing, it was marketed to get high. So what happened with the bath salts, or excuse me, the spice, is as they smoke the spice, if they use a small amount of it, it's not as extreme. But there's no way to really control how much you're getting. So a person on spice typically will overdose. They don't die from it, but it goes into a really long, intense trip, really similar to like an LSD type trip. And I know people that have talked about it and said that they really thought that they were dying, that they really thought, and then they said it was really demonic. They said that as they looked at the other people, they felt like they were demons and the devil and stuff. And that's where the violence comes in, because what these people are seeing while they're on the spice and the bath salts are not normal visions, of course. They're seeing everything distorted because of the chemicals within their brain. So the spice, and we were all saddened last year when Doug Morjo was murdered, and that Nathan Calvert was on spice, and he had used it numerous times.
That's what I'd read.
To the point where he was hallucinating extreme. it's a dangerous drug, and it's out there. The state of Montana, and it is passed within the state. It's also a controlled substance now, spice and bath salts. And the tribe has adopted all of the illegal drug codes for the state. So when that happens, we take that right into our court system as well.
You know, I was looking at some statistics earlier, and it looks like when we did have a meth project back in 2005, and this may be under, I doubt that it's over, but it said back then that, and this is studies that were done through the meth project, meth.org, 53% of children in foster care are there due to meth. Do you think that's...
I would say it's equal, if not more, at this point.
The cost to the state at that time was $12 million a year. So this is huge. This spills out into so many different areas that probably a lot of us don't give a lot of thought to, but this is a really huge expense. The toll ultimately is life.
Yeah.
Life as we knew it. That's the ultimate sacrifice is life when you decide to do these drugs. Another statistic was 50% of the adults in prison were there due to meth-related crimes.
I would say we're there right now, if not more again. I know within our facility and the county facility, I would venture a guess we're close to 80% of all people incarcerated are some form of meth that we have right now in our facilities. That's a pretty high number.
Well, as treatment for meth, you know, I was reading, and typically people that are hooked on meth or some of these other really highly addictive drugs, it's not necessarily going to be a voluntary cry for help. They won't voluntarily
No, not at all.
say that they need help. So that's where kind of, sadly, but that's where the legal system or the CPS, social services, seems like that responsibility kind of falls on them because it does impact the family and their ability to parent.
It's pretty sad because, like I said, the person could have been a great parent prior to the meth use. And once they get to that point, and we have people that come in and out of our jail constantly on different charges, and they're drug addicts. It's usually what causes the problem is the meth addiction. And many of them just want to get back out and get high again. That's all they think about when they're in there is getting back out and using the drug again.
Now, is that kind of the nature of the beast?
I think it is. We had a guy that we had arrested quite a few years ago, back in like 2000, and he was a meth cook. And he said the addiction was to get high, but the other addiction was to get high and make meth. He said, so the addiction just kept feeding itself. He said, I get high and all I want to do is make meth, and then when I'd make the meth, I just want to get high and then make more meth. And so the addiction just kept feeding himself. So as the person's high like that, and that's all they think about is to get back out, there comes a point when they've been incarcerated for a period of time that they're thinking sober, that they don't have that near as much of a craving because they've been away from the drug for a long time. So if you get that person and they've been separated from the drug long enough, the chances for recovery are better, because that's when the other programs would need to step in. And just establishing those programs costs a lot of money.
What kind of programs do we have locally? I mean, it seems we have, of course, tribal health, and it seems like it's really difficult sometimes. The demand seems like it would be a whole lot greater than what we're able to provide.
I think the demand is there, and I think what you touched on just prior to this was they have to want it. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that I think all of us struggle with the addiction, especially with methamphetamine, is how do you get that person to want to recover? Because when you have someone, even let's say they've been locked up for a year, and they get back out and immediately go right back to that lifestyle, how do you break that cycle? And the treatment will work only if the person wants it. And I would like to see more people want it. And I think one of the things that I've worked with John Denton on a little bit, and something that he's really been on, is cognitive thinking and really being responsible for your actions. If a person's sober long enough that we can get them into some kind of a training within the jail system to start going through a class of cognitive thinking and actually taking responsibility for their actions. Once they get to that point, and I think at that point when they say, man, the reason I'm in jail is my own fault, and they start thinking about that, then the chances of recovery will be a lot greater. But you have to get a person to start thinking that way, and it's a process.
You know, it looks today like we're starting to see more young people getting involved with drugs. You know, I think it's kind of interesting how with some people, a dare not to do it once is like almost that, I can do it twice because I can handle this. And you know, there was a presenter I listened to not too long ago who was talking about the frontal cortex of children. Until they're 25, they're really not able to make rational decisions yet. That portion of the brain is not fully developed until they're 25. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's like, I kind of think that makes sense. So a lot of people will make these impulsive decisions. And of course, we were teenagers, and I can remember thinking I was invincible, and you know, I could jump off buildings and all these things, until you try to jump off a little shed and it really hurts.
Yeah, that definitely happens.
So you know, that whole thinking process, and when you add drugs to the mixture, it really is a deadly combination.
And a former addict, recovering addict, I guess, told me at one time that when he started using at a very young age, that he stopped maturing. He said, and then once he stopped using, later on in life, when he was in his late 20s, it's like he had the same maturity level as when he started using the drug. And we see that quite often with people. If they start using the drugs and the heavier drugs at a young age, let's say 15, 16 years old, and then they continue to go down that path, they're making those same choices up into their 30s, and they're like juvenile type decisions. Once they get off the drug and to get their mind back on where it should be, they can start making better choices. But it's like the process of maturity almost is at a standstill until they get their head on straight.
Treatment for meth and some of these other hardcore drugs out there, is a 28-day treatment enough to get them going in the right direction?
I would say it would be a good start. I think that there has to be more long-term, because you could, in 28 days, I think you might get the person to start thinking of their consequences a little bit, and they might make some good choices. But what happens is as soon as they get done, let's say it's a court-ordered situation, once they fulfill their 28 days, what's to stop them from going back? What kind of groups are out there for mentoring type situations, in a group where they can talk? What other programs are available in community programs to keep that person on the straight and narrow? I mean, I've worked with a few people locally and helped mentor them, and they have my phone number, my cell phone, and if they're having a bad day, they can call. And there needs to be more people. It doesn't have to be cops, it doesn't have to be doctors, it doesn't have to be a mental health worker, it doesn't have to be a counselor. Just having a person to talk to when they're having that bad day could possibly keep them from going back on the drug, because many people who are on probation do a great job. Let's say they're on probation for 5 years and do great. They have a fear of when they get off of probation. Not all of them do, but many of them do, that once they're no longer going to be held accountable, that freedom comes back and they will use again. And they're afraid of the choices that they potentially could make. Because many of them right now that I know that are on probation are doing great, but they also are getting close to getting off probation. And once they get off, they could go right back down that slippery slope.
Yeah, I've heard it said many times, people will go through treatment, they're actually in a good place in their minds. I mean, they're starting to think healthier. Then they come out and they think that because they've had this small window of sobriety or better thinking, that they'll come out and they'll help all their friends. And it's like it's a fatal mistake every time. I have never seen that to be a successful undertaking for the person who has that thought or for the people who aren't ready.
Yeah.
It's like you fall right back into the same friends. So it really is, you know, that decision comes with a few sacrifices, and your friends could be a part of that sacrifice if they're using.
Yeah, friends and family.
Yeah. So we got a couple minutes left, but I kind of wanted to talk about what are some of the places that you're aware of. This is always the question we ask in our suicide intervention classes. It's like, what are some of the resources out here and available for people if they did find themselves in that window of opportunity, that 5 minutes where, I mean, and they say it, you know, addicts don't like being addicts. Addicts are addicts because the drug has kind of taken over their life. What are some resources where someone could call? I mean, they can't call you 24/7 on your cell phone. They can't call me 24/7. What can we offer to people right now?
There are the chemical dependency. They can call the people from chemical dependency. They can call and ask for an on-call counselor. A lot of times people will call up and having maybe suicidal tendencies or something of that nature, and we will get in contact with the on-calls. The on-calls, again, they can't get a hold of them all the time because they get busy. They get pretty busy on things. Those are options. The other thing is call a family member, call a friend, call someone to at least help you through that situation, because if you don't call, you're probably going to make a bad choice.
You know, the problem with families sometimes is that it's so close, and the families have just gone through so much with this individual that the doors are closed, and oftentimes that happens because of stealing that starts to happen to support the addiction, horrible things that are said. It's like it's part of the myth cycle.
If I could just really touch really quickly on one more thing that we were looking at possibly doing, and this is through the substance abuse work group, is we're looking at like a 24-hour drug shutdown. And we have certain areas where we have a lot of drugs, we have a lot of CPS cases, a lot of violence. We would look at going in there with a group, with a drum group, with Tribal Waves and Team Extreme, the Samoan group, doing a barbecue, pig roast, a round dance, and do the whole thing for the communities. And do it for 24 hours, like in an evening, from a Friday evening to a Saturday evening. And in that area, those areas, there would be no drugs dealt for 24 hours or used, because we would be there with law enforcement and the whole group to be there. Maybe by doing that within the communities, the community will feel the support that they need. And maybe there's a few people in there who are having those tough situations that will start to meet some of the people in the group and say, okay, I have a contact person. And we can develop that, or someone from tribal health, someone from CPS, someone from law enforcement, someone from mental health, someone from wherever. Then they start to put a name to the face, and they'll feel more safe about maybe talking about the problems.
Wouldn't that be nice to have a safer community where we're not worried about looking over our shoulders, worried about our homes being
That would
robbed?
be ideal.
Yeah, that would be ideal. Craige, thank you so much. Our time is up. This has been very helpful, very interesting.
Thank you, Roxy.
Good Medicine is your program. We hope you watch this and subsequent programs to stay informed about your health care. And we'd like to hear from you about how we're doing. Please direct any comments or suggestions you have to us. You can reach us at